Welcome to Zambition, the channel on which we engage in dialogue with leaders from across sectors and generations. Greetings and welcome to Zambition. My name is Martin Kalungubanda, your host on this channel. Today, our guest is someone whose dedication and passion to nature inspires me tremendously. Her name is Musonda Kapena. She brings over 20 years of local and international experience of promoting indigenous knowledge systems. Musonda, as I said earlier on, is passionate about nature and its connection to the wisdom of our people. Musonda is the coordinator at the Zambia National Forest Commodity Association, an organization that is also supported by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization Forest Food Facility Program. Our guest is also co-founder of the Namfumu Conservation Trust. Musonda, welcome to Zambition.
Thanks a lot, Martin. I'm very happy to join you this afternoon.
Let's begin by finding out from you what object or image best reflects who you are and the journey you have walked so far. And kindly share with us 2 or more moments that have shaped you the most into the person and leader you are today.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Well, I wanted this broadcast out in the forest, but then we couldn't figure out the sound aspect. So I have here is a leaf. It's from a tree. So for me, it represents the forest. In the background, you can see that I'm a lover of green. The tree represents a lot for me in the sense that without the tree, you don't have the forest. You can't speak about the soil, you can't speak about the water, you can't speak about the air, of the insects, of the birds, of the wildlife without talking about the tree. The tree is mainly for me in the center of the forest. It enables the mushrooms to grow. It enables the inswa. Inswa is termites. In Zambia, we eat edible termites. We eat edible caterpillars. We eat a lot of critters, which is a main source of protein, especially for our rural folk. In the urban city, it's a delicacy. So for me, the forest without trees there's no life in it. So my most defining moment in terms of falling in love with the forest is my father. I remember when I was very young, he took us to the Musonda Falls in Livingston. And on the ground those days, they were like toffee looking stones. So he picked one up and said, "Here." And I'm like, "Yeah, toffee." And he said, "Yeah, eat it." And of course, you know what happened. I bit into it and my teeth were like, it's a stone. How can this stone be shaped so smoothly and have so much texture and warmth about it? Unfortunately, now when you go to the Musonda Falls, you won't see any of those stones on the ground. I think a lot of people have picked them out and they're in other places. But for me, it made me start feeling if this stone is not man-made, it's from nature. What more is there in nature? And of course, the magnificence of the Musonda Falls was also a defining moment. Like, how can the earth break and let the water fall so powerfully and so crisp? It just also ignited my poetry because I couldn't find the words to describe what I was seeing and the experience and just the magnificence of God. And of course, while in Livingston, we took a few drives and there were these huge baobab trees and I was seeing the elephants for the first time. And I asked him, how come we have such big trees here and there's nothing in Lusaka? So he said, well, these trees were used as a representation of God by the olden people. They worshipped the creator by worshiping the creation. Whatever made this huge Mosotunya Falls is surely greater than me. And because of that, for me, it made me start thinking supernaturally as well. And in came indigenous knowledge systems. So if people saw the greatness of God and used that as an altar of worship. So in short, that was the most defining moment. But also when I was in secondary school, I was in the environmental club. When I was in primary school, I was part of the Chongololo club, and I loved the excursions that we went on. Later on in life, I opted not to go to university because then I didn't find anything interesting. But I went to Mwekera. And Mwekera is a forestry college in Zambia, which was in the heart of a forest reserve. And in the northwestern corner, there was what we used to call the falls, but it's actually a rapid. And that place was so dark because the trees were so tall and the vegetation so thick. I just said, this is my office. I don't need to sit in a concrete jungle and work from there. There was such fresh air, the sounds of the insects and the birds and the flowing water. That for me just calmed my soul and it cleared my mind. I thought better in the forest. And I think better in the forest even now. Put me in a concrete jungle, I feel really claustrophobic and I have mental block.
Musonda, I'm fascinated by your story. How, as a young person, you connected with nature. What is also fascinating for me is looking at you beginning your work at the age that you did. What makes a young person look away from the attractions of the cities in order to focus on connecting with and deepening one's understanding of the intricacies that nature has, but also the wisdom of our people? What drew you to the work you are currently doing?
Okay, that's not a very easy question, but I'll make it personal to me. I grew up most of my young life in diplomatic service. My father was a diplomat for a while. And when we came back, um, I was exposed now to both sides of my extended family. My mother is Tonga from the Gwembe Valley, and my father is Bemba from the Northern Province. And I experienced a clash of cultures, which were just fascinating for me. It was, I can't call it a step down. I think it was a step up for me to realize that there are languages that I can learn. So each time would receive visitors from my father's side or my mother's side, or of course would go visiting and experience other subcultures of Zambia, but also because we were in Congo for a while, I appreciated the multicultural aspects. And I think from an early age, I'm analytical. So at one point, in comes my father again. I complained to him. I said, why don't I have an English name? Why do I have two African names? Then he said, well, your African names mean a lot more than I understand English names mean to us. So he said the name Musonda actually comes from the Bemba land. Musonda in the past would be the advance party for the king. So where Musonda goes and comes back, then the Bemba kings would go. So Musonda means pathfinder for the king. Kapena, coincidentally, also means pathfinder because in Bemba, and I quote, Uku Peninsula means opening up the way for others to go. So in the village, early in the morning, when the women wake up to draw the water, often the grass is full of dew and it's wet. The Kapena would be the one who walks out first and sacrifices to get wet so that the other women following would find a clear path. So both my names coincidentally mean pathfinder. So in pathfinding, you kind of have a critical eye, you have a sense of adventure, a sense of exploration, and that is how come for me, there's more to explore in the unknown, what they call the terra incognita in Latin, more than what I can find in the cities. In the cities, it's defined. You've got a map, you know the road name, you know where the buildings are, you know where the mall is, you know where the graveyard is, you know where the social amenities are. So there's nothing much to explore. When I go into the village, my first experience in the village was just fascinating. I visited my mother's village in the Gwembe Valley, and my grandfather sacrificed a bull for me. Apparently, he did that for all his grandchildren who visited. And when they opened up the bowl, I saw sausage. But that wasn't sausage, it was the intestines. But coming from an urban area and an urban setting, I thought sausage is already in the cow. You don't have to do anything with it, you just find it there. But apart from that, we went to draw the water from the stream and we made a fire. And my grandfather was a good cook. He would cook without any spice, without any tomatoes or onions. He just had a way of balancing the heat and cutting up the pieces of meat in such a way that the surface area is just right for the food to cook. So in came the feeling that there's a combination between science and indigenous knowledge. People in the village don't do things by accident. They don't have the luxury of time to just experiment. Everything done in the village, from cooking shima, there's a recipe. From cooking chikanda, which is like wild orchids, there's a recipe. And that recipe has been there for time immemorial. I've been fascinated that with chikanda, which is a local delicacy, it's a vegan sausage, so to say. It never goes bad. And that was the food that the warriors would carry around with them. All they would have to do is rehydrate it, cook the nshima and eat it. So it's food on the go. But even that, looking from an urban perspective, you wouldn't really know because nobody has measured the shelf life. Nobody has taken the chikanda into a lab to say the shelf life is 6 months or 1 year. We don't know, but the people from the village know exactly how to preserve it in a smoky kitchen, and it attains a smokiness which is flavorful, and you can cook it throughout the year. It won't go bad. So my attraction is in the forest, is in the communities, it's with the village people. They teach me more than I can ever learn at the university, more than I can ever learn in a classroom, because they speak from what they have done. They speak about their intimate relationship with the forest.
It's phenomenally fascinating listening to you. And I must confess, I'm envious at your capacity to go down in history, to locate where your names come from and the meaning that you attach to those names. And and also just your ability to see much more deeper in the wisdom of our people and begin to see science in that or connect traditional wisdom with science. Thank you for providing an inspiration in that area. Let me come back to the moment we are living, the COVID era. I think from this moment, we are learning that if we humans overstep the boundaries, the ones who will suffer the consequences in the long term is not nature. Mother Nature has more resilience and capacity, has been there before us, and can and will continue to be there after us. What lessons should we as Zambia learn on how to relate with Mother Nature?
Wow, that's a deep question. Zambia in the rural areas has recorded very few, if any, COVID incidences. Zambia in the peri-urban and the urban areas is where there's been a lot of incidents. So the question I would ask is, what are the village people doing right that we're not doing or that we're doing wrong? I've had the chance to travel at the peak of COVID into the rural communities. And there are certain practices and traditions that they have used since time immemorial that act as sanitizer, for example. When you cook on a wood stove, the ash is sometimes more important than the energy that the wood produced. We use the ash to cook our vegetables. It's rich in potash. We use the ash to make salt in areas where there's no salt. But also recently, when you go to a properly organized village, you find that they've mixed the ash with water. And that's what they've hung by the pit latrine as your hand wash. And I tested it out. It feels very soapy, but also because there's something in the ash solution, which we often call chidulo, which just kills all the viruses and bacteria and stuff on your hands. So they use that even to clean the pit latrine. They sprinkle ash around the pit hole. Then the flies don't sit there. So there's something in the ash that works for them. Instead of taking sanitizer, the sanitizers we have to the village, we should learn how the ash works. Then we'll have a cheaper source of disinfectant for the hands. Then furthermore, they have a tradition of steaming. They would walk into the forest and pluck certain types of leaves from certain tree species. Some of these tree species you can smell with your nose that there's methanol in it. And with that, they just brew it up in a pot, get a heavy blanket, and there are techniques to this. For the children, they don't use a hot rock to extend the steaming period. They just cover them up and ask them to breathe in through the mouth and out through the nose. Then they alternate to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And that actually, when I used it, it made my skin glow. It made my chest feel like I'm alive again. And there's just a science behind that that needs exploring as well. It is indigenous knowledge, which has helped them survive asthma. It has helped them manage tuberculosis. It has helped them to manage the flus and colds that they have. They don't always run to the hospital for solutions. They come up with their own nature-based solutions that has been around because they have an intimate connection with nature.
Using and spreading wider than the local communities you are making reference to, so that the whole country, the whole Africa region, and maybe even teach other parts of the world to use these locally available solutions to the challenges we face. In this particular case, some of the ways of mitigating the ravages of COVID-19. What do you think stands in the way?
Um, Actually, these techniques have been used for aeons by the Red Indians, by the Oriental populations. The difference with Africa is that, and Zambia in particular, is that we perceive rural communities as backward. We perceive what they do as pagan. We perceive the practices and the foods and the beliefs as things that don't help us. So the fastest way to start to mitigate that attitude is to ignite mindset change, to raise the consciousness, to demonstrate that it works. There are some associations like the Traditional Health Practitioners Association, TAPAZ, led by Dr. Vongo. They specialize in ethnobotany. They know what trees are magical. They know what trees are healing trees. They know which trees should never be messed with in the forest. In Eastern Province, the Msoro tree is perceived to be a magical tree because when there's misfortune in the village, you go to the Msoro tree and you speak to it. Not that you're worshiping nature, but then they find that it's a magnificent tree that reminds them of the creator.
If we want
Yes.
to keep healthy, if we want to maintain that good balance between our well being and the well being of nature, we don't have to go far. Our universities and colleges need to be interested in going to learn from the wisdom of our people. We will
Yes.
take a little break, and when we return, Musonda, I will ask you what your ambition is.
Are you an entrepreneur looking for a place to work from? Do you want to develop your leadership skills? Do you have an idea or business you'd want to scale? Are you looking for a place to host training and learning events? If you answered yes to any of the questions, then Impact Lusaka is the place for you. It is a social innovation hub that is part of Impact Hub Global Network that supports various entrepreneurs and social innovators. Our services, among others, include co-working space, event hosting, incubation and acceleration programs, capacity building in leadership and business.
Welcome back. Our guest today is an environmental justice campaigner, but she is much more. Musonda Kapena. Musonda, what is your ambition? What is your highest aspiration for our country?
I'll take that question in two ways. My personal ambition is to be influential to the young generation. There's a gap of knowledge between the young generation and the senior citizens. I consider the senior citizens as my library because they know so much more through life's experiences than I can learn in a book. But then I've noticed there's a gap. Our younger generation are using gadgets as their library more than they are having time to spend with their grandmothers and grandfathers. Remember that we don't need to have a biological granny or grandpa to sit with. We have a lot of old people out there who are lonely. Half of them we don't even pay attention to. I often sit with environmental giants like Juliana Chileshe. I sit with her and we just sit. We have our quiet moments, but we have our moments where she remembers things and I'm like, wow, you know. We have others like Mr. Robert Chimambo. He's an anthropologist. He knows the history of this country anthropologically, politically, socially, culturally, at the back of his hand. And he's just a phone call away. If he doesn't pick up the phone because he's got siesta that afternoon, take a drive to his house and sit and ask him, why do we drink juice and not chibuantu? Where did Munkoyo come from? There's a whole chapter in the story of how Munkoyo was brewed. What's the difference between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic Munkoyo? There are other people like Ramiwenge in Livingston. He worked for National Heritage for a long time. He would tell you the history and what happened in history, how it happened, how it became eroded, and what we can do to go back to that. That for me is time well spent. The gadget, of course, will work to record his voice and to just record and keep what he is saying. But at the end of it, nothing beats the experience of looking into his eyes or into the eyes of the old people and relive the experiences they have lived. I hope I can grow that old and open an academy to just sit and talk. That's our heritage. Ubuntu is about storytelling. But the difference the young people can make is turn those stories into animations, turn those stories into TikTok, and turn them into all kinds of social media platforms that other young people who don't have access to the senior citizens have. Then at a national level, my ambition is to see rural communities, the traditional leadership, and all of us that have a passion for the environment to take advantage of the provision in the Forest Act of 2015, where we're encouraged to have community managed forests. You can actually apply for the process and become an honorary forest officer and take care of up to 5,000, 10,000 hectares of land as a community. So the proximate community will be the immediate custodians of conserving the forest. I love what Eastern Province does. It's a cultural aspect where their graveyards have become botanical reserves. The graveyard traditionally is left only to enter when you're going to bury somebody. After you've buried, nobody is allowed to go there. There's a mysticism around going back into the graveyard for anything. So there are examples of Lundazi where these graveyards exist and they are the only places with the original vegetation of the area. The rest of the area is farmed and you can't even find a natural tree because all the trees have been unsustainably harvested to cure tobacco and have been unsustainably harvested because there are quite a number of high value timbers in the area. So my ambition is to see a raised environmental consciousness and eco consciousness where everybody now starts to realize that we're not the problem. The earth can continue without us, but we are dead without it. We are dead without bees. We are dead without termites. We are dead without mosquitoes. We're dead without the snakes. Because when God created the earth, or whatever ideology you have, there should be a balance. When there's an imbalance in one area, then everything goes wrong. We start seeing flooding, we start seeing diseases coming up, we start seeing our skin is changing. It's because the food is imbalanced. The food is imbalanced because the soil doesn't have the nutrients it needs to have. We don't have enough water in the boreholes. There are areas in Lusaka and parts of the world where land is cheap. It's cheap because you can drill a borehole as deep as you want. There's no underground water, it's gone. So we're suffering water scarcity because we haven't managed the forest resources properly. I want to see every town in Zambia with green spaces. The green spaces act as carbon sinks. How many cars are coming into the country every single day? Our borders have queues of cars. Where does the carbon go? When it enters this country, where does the carbon go? In Lusaka, you get an allergic reaction when you go into town because there's carbon and there's not enough trees sucking it in. So my ambition really is to see a Zambia that is environmentally conscious, a Zambia that has respect for nature, a Zambia that has respect for the elders who have kept in posterity the forest reserves that we have. If our ancestors did not have us in mind, the way we seem not to have our descendants in mind, then we're finished. We will not have the Zambia that we see. And considering we're confined by the borders of Zambia, where else do we go if we destroy our country? We can do charcoal all we want, but in the past, they only cut down the species that could make charcoal. They did not cut down the fruit trees. They did not cut down the medicinal trees to make charcoal. So we still have a choice. I know we still have hope, but the hope I have is that everybody should be environmentally conscious and collectively we will be the change we want to see. Thank you.
Ecological consciousness, a Zambia that is eco-conscious, to use your language, Musonda.
Yes.
And considering your work and the experience you have had on the ground, if Mother Nature had a voice and could speak, what could she say about Zambia and her relationship with herself, nature?
If I was Mother Nature, what I would say to the rest of Zambia is be gentle with me. I have given you all that I can give you. I have given you the fresh water that you're enjoying, the fish or the organisms in the water. I have given you. I have given you rich arable soils. I have given you the mineral wealth that is in the ground. But that doesn't mean you rape me every single day. That doesn't mean you don't appreciate all the bounty that is there. If you go back to 1964, the populations were fewer, but we had practices that made sure that we only harvested what we needed. If every Zambian, if all the 19 million Zambians had one bag of charcoal, would still have enough trees to survive for another 100 years. But because we are consuming more than I'm able to give back to you, we'll end up with nothing. So be gentle with me. Leave some for tomorrow. I may not be able to give as much as I've been giving because your rate of consumption is higher than my rate of regeneration and restoration. Allow me to regenerate naturally. Help me by planting trees, by switching off the electricity when you don't need it, by turning off the tap when you don't need to use the water. Only then can we keep more resources for tomorrow. At the rate we're going, we will not have what I am able to give.
Hearing that gentle voice of Mother Nature, even when she doesn't need us, we need her. But through your own intonation, Musonda, I could hear that gentleness in the voice of Mother Nature. And finally, what is the best piece of advice you have ever been given, Musonda?
I remember in grade 8 when I was at Roma Girls, I encountered Sister Kiran, and her mantra would always be, a small thing is a small thing, but it's a great thing to be faithful to a small thing. When you think about that deeply, you realize that every little small thing we do is important. And if we are faithful to the small things, then we'll be faithful to the bigger things. So when you throw a sweet wrapper on the ground, that has a ripple effect in making big trash. But if we take it, put it in our pocket, and throw it in the designated place, we'll be helping Mother Nature. Then the second one is from His Lordship Bishop George Zumaire Lungu, who said, blossom where you are planted. So if you only want to blossom where it's comfortable, then you will never grow. But if you blossom wherever you're planted, then you will take advantage of what you have where you are to start from there. You don't need to start from a point of comfort. Start from a point of discomfort and make that comfortable for you. Then it'll be comfortable for everybody. So blossom where you're planted. And a small thing is a small thing, but it's a great thing to be faithful to a small thing.
Your wisdom is phenomenally astounding. I wish many of us can not just listen to you, but begin to practice that wisdom which you continue to unravel in our traditional communities. And I hope we can join your efforts in respecting and maintaining the boundaries we have with Mother Nature so that she can continue to protect us and to protect those that will come long after we have gone. Thank you very much for your wisdom. Thank you very much for your generosity in sharing your learnings.
Thank you very much as well. I've enjoyed this interview greatly.
Having listened to the dialogue and followed my conversation with our guest, I now invite you to look at the drawing that emerged out of that dialogue. Take time to see the contours, the colors, the images that are reflected on the painting, on the drawing. Pay attention to what the drawing evokes in you. Kindly share your reflections on this channel so that we can continue the dialogue on the future of our nation.